Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have Jessica. Join us for a conversation about how another world is possible. Together, we talk about following your zest for life, creating mutually empowering relationships, and joining in our collective repair. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. I am so delighted to have all of you pleasure activists from around the world tuning in for another episode each Wednesday. My name is Nicole. I am a sex and relationship psychotherapist with training in psychedelic integration therapy, and I am also the founder of the Pleasure Practice, supporting individuals in crafting expansive sex lives and intimate relationships. Dear listener, another world is possible. That is the anarchist saying, and it is a part of all of our responsibilities as pleasure activists to see that world, to feel into that world, and then to embody that world in our relationships, right? The personal is the political, and the revolution begins in our relationships. And so today's episode is an invitation to reflect on peace, embodiment, slowing down and being present, to love the people before you. And this world is wild right now. I know I have listeners globally that are not in the US, but in the US, things are pretty wow. Every day you wake up and it's another thing. And so I think it's been pretty hard to see a world of peaceful transition to any other future where, like Jessica said, a world where we care about every single person. Oh, our current systems are so far from that. And it's difficult to remember that our current systems are not broken. They are actually working in the way that the people who design them want them to work, right? And so it is hard to think about another world through peace. I just want to say that I am struggling with that, dear listener, every day when we wake up and see the news that is happening in our world. And I am grateful for Jessica and this message to try and embody a world of peaceful love, a world where we go through rupture and repair, and where we trust in the power and the ripples of the love and all of the moments that we are creating in our communities. I do believe in that, right? The power of our community. And so when all of these systems are wild and big and scary and out of our control, I hope you can focus on the people in front of you, the people that you know, and how can we bring that new world, that vision of that other world into our reality, into our relationships today. All right, dear listener, if you are ready to liberate your pleasure, you can explore my offerings and resources at modernanarchypodcast.com, linked in the show notes below. And I want to say the biggest thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. You are supporting the long-term sustainability of the podcast, keeping this content free and accessible to all people. So thank you. If you want to join the Patreon community, get exclusive access into my research and personal exploration, then you can head on over to patreon.com/modernanarchypodcast, also linked in the show notes below. And with that, dear listener, please know that I am sending you all my love, and let's tune in to today's episode. All right, Jessica. So the first question that I ask every guest is, how would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is just owning what's most important to me, which is that I'm a mystic. And it's something that I have not, that has taken a long time to kind of own, but it's such a deep part of who I am. And what I love, what mysticism means to me is really being comfortable with not knowing,
Mm,
like being able to dive into the great mystery, into the unknown, and be open to what emerges out of that place,
yeah.
out of that not knowing, and something new that's being birthed in the moment, that's emerging in the moment that we don't already know. And so that is how I try to live my life. And another aspect of mysticism that I love is it's really focused on our direct experience and really valuing that, valuing our own experience and our own wisdom gained from our experience. And so I'm just endlessly fascinated by people's experience. And I have a master's degree in user experience
Mm,
design and a bachelor's degree in psychology and religious studies. And so those are, I just, in the religious studies part was mostly studying the mystical aspects of
hmm.
spiritual traditions. And so I just have a deep, endless, lifelong fascination with the human experience and what that
Sure.
means and going deep into that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exciting. Well, I'm delighted to have you here today and to
thank you.
see where our minds get up to. Even just that first piece about the unfolding, right, of the future in that way. It's hard, so hard, right? I want to know what's going to happen. Where are we going? Where are we going? I try to predict out, and every time I'm met with the reality that it's not what I thought it would be, right? And so I try to
Totally.
practice in terms of my spirituality and definitely practicing and teaching yoga, like just the active presence. Like, okay, I'm here right now. I'm here right now again. And right now again, right? And trying to come back to that. It's like every week on my agenda or calendar, it has like, what's this week's goal? And I've like flipped back through presence, 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 like just repeatedly like trying to be present and right here. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
so hard when we want that, like, where are we going, especially in relationships, sexuality, so much of a hold of like, where are we moving in our dynamic? What are we building? So to come back to presence can be really, really hard. But I feel like that's also, I know you had mentioned the interest of talking about sacred pleasure. And I feel like presence is deeply connected to pleasure. And so I'm curious where that leads you when I'm saying these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, why don't you say more about that for you? What being in the moment, how does that relate to sacred pleasure to you?
Okay, well, right now I've got this cup of tea, right? So if
Hmm.
I'm, or literally, maybe I'll just go back a little bit like 10 minutes ago before this recording, right? Like me scarfing down my lunch, going, oh, I got to get that client note in. I got to do this. Like, I got to do this. Oh, but what am I doing later tonight? Do I have enough time? Right. I'm
Yeah.
not tasting my food. I
Mm,
am not
yeah.
tasting my food. Like, I really don't think that I can actually feel and think at the same time. The second I tune into felt, there is no cognitive up here. It might be the oh, this is delicious, this tastes like that, but I'm not actively like processing life for other things. And so I really do feel like the pleasure of our felt senses and being here. Not that all pleasure is purely sensational. I guess you could have like pleasurable thoughts too, but the basis of it being in sensation, I really don't think I can be thinking about the past or the future if I'm trying to be present with pleasure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally. There's a kind of intimacy with life that happens when we're fully engaged with our senses and fully in the
Hmm.
moment and, smelling all the beautiful smells and tasting all the delicious, you know,
Right.
tastes and hearing the birds chirping and, actually seeing the incredible beauty that's all around us that we often are so in our mind, and caught up in thoughts that we were missing the like
Yep.
miracle of life
I
that is
know.
all around us, that is just so life-giving in and of itself, to be attuned to the beauty in each and every moment, and
Mm-hmm.
like the exquisiteness of this planet, that it's so easy to get caught up in all of the problems and challenges of life, and forget that we are on this ball floating through space, filled, teeming with life that we have not seen on any other planet. We have not discovered anywhere else yet. But
Mm-hmm.
our planet is just filled with life, abundance of life and color and diversity and just exquisite, yeah, beauty. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, tuning into that absolutely is such an important part of life, and so easy to miss. Can go
Totally.
our whole life and just miss the beauty that's all around us. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like the
Yeah.
glass half full, half empty thing. I feel like sometimes, especially if you start off your day listening to the news, right, or other sorts of things, like there's so much of the half empty. And it's always that yes and. There are horrible atrocities going on in our world. And it's also, yeah, a life giving planet in the cosmos of infinite grandeur, right? Like that yes and.
Yes.
And I feel like that's definitely been like a muscle that has been grown when I like sit in therapy sessions talking about like really complex trauma and hearing clients' stories. And then I'm supposed to like get out at the end of my day and just like go hang out with my friends and be happy. Like it is tough. Like it was a muscle. It's still a muscle I'm growing in the ability
Yeah.
to like sit in that, be with someone, and then like get out and be like, okay. And usually for me, what I do in those moments are like body stuff, like how do I breathe? And then it's usually next like nature. That's usually my next thing. I like look at the clouds, get some perspective, and I'm like, okay, this is a beautiful world. Like it is a beautiful world. It's got a lot of pain, but it is pretty, and like kind of try and like balance that. But that's been like a really hard job as a therapist, I would say.
Absolutely. I agree. Yeah, I'm not a therapist, but I work with clients in a healing way for
Sure.
my whole career since high
Yeah.
school. So for 30 years, almost 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
in various different healing modalities. And yeah, just with my own life experience as well, just had a lot of complex trauma from childhood,
Mm.
a tremendous amount of
Yeah.
trauma from childhood. And to, yeah, how to balance that, because I've also always been a very deeply spiritual person. And so I guess that's why I've just had an endless fascination in life with both healing and awakening,
Mm.
because both are so predominant in my life, just having a natural spiritual propensity, but then having so much trauma to heal from,
Right.
and such a strong desire to want to help others heal and help others awaken. And so for me, sacred pleasure is really about that.
Mm.
It's about that because that is connected to the deepest part of my soul, like the deepest part of who I am and what I'm about and what my heart calls
Yeah.
to, it speaks to.
Sure.
And I think for all of us, like there's the line on your website that said discovering and pursuing the things that bring your soul alive and give you greater zest for life.
Mm.
And I just love that line. And I think that is such a noble pursuit. And it's so deeply personal about what does give us that juice and zest for life. And I really think that has to do with when we're in alignment with our soul's purpose. And that soul's purpose is unique to each individual. Like we don't know why we love what we love and why we're drawn to what we're drawn to
Mm-hmm.
and what we're interested in, why we're interested in what we're interested in. Like we don't know, but we do know that we're interested in it, right? We do know that we have a passion for it. We have something deep inside of us, inside of our heart that just it beckons, it just relentlessly
Mm-hmm.
beckons. But it's also patient and persistent. It's not forceful, but it's just like, can be this still small voice that's quiet, but just always kind of prompting you in a particular direction. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, at least what I've noticed in my own life and with clients is when we're not in alignment with that, that's when we suffer. That's when we experience the deepest pain and the deepest suffering, is when we're actually going against that deep impulse of our heart's calling, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But so sacred pleasure to me is the opposite. Sacred pleasure to me is being in alignment with our soul, like doing the things that call to us. And because when we do, they are life giving, they are
Mm-hmm.
soul enhancing. That's when we get the zest for life.
Yeah.
That's when our soul comes alive, is when we're actually listening to it
Mm-hmm.
instead of, nope. I hear it calling, but nope, I'm too busy. I'm too busy.
Yeah.
I'm not going to answer the call right now.
Right.
And I've spent most of my life in this dance between listening and refusing the call.
Sure. Sure.
When I refuse the call, I suffer. And when when I pick up the call, it is so life enhancing
Mm-hmm.
and joyful, like
Yeah.
ecstatically joyful.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you found your path and I found mine. It feels good. Like I love that like my path like quite literally like brings me that life force, gets me all riled up and I'm like, yeah, like let's do this. I think when I think about this, it's tricky because so much of our connection to our pleasure is literally just obliterated by systems, right? Like even the larger scale of capitalism, how many people hate their jobs and are actively forced to work in this because where are you going to get that health insurance? Where are you going to, like all these other, levels to this that like, you get the Sunday scaries. That's for a reason. Maybe it's not because that job actually isn't in alignment with your pleasure because of the systems. Maybe that amount of work, isn't in alignment. I always think back to the fact that people literally had to die for us to have a 5-day work week, and like prior to that, the systems
Yeah.
were even worse, right? So like for all of the people that have the Sunday scaries, I'm like, yeah, that's because this isn't good, right? So like just the ways that so much of our pleasure is actively cut off, and so I don't like to end the conversation there because I think that the dismantling of that is going to take a long time. And I do try to remember that, like, it's like a tapestry, right? We all have different threads that we're going to be pulling on. Like, for me, it's sex and relationships. For another person, it's like changing transportation, I don't know, all these different sides of it. And, all these different parts that we can pull at the thread to change those systems. And while we're under these systems, what does it mean to center our pleasure in the ways that we can, right? Is it that I'm actually going to take these 5 minutes that I have in between picking up my kids today to just sit and breathe with a cup of tea? I've got only 5 minutes, but I'm going to center my pleasure, right? I just try to think about the different ways that under the responsibilities and these systems, we still can center our pleasure. And the more that you tune into that, the more that it grows, right? It's like a voice. Maybe you have an inner critic, right? The more you listen to that, the more it grows. That inner pleasure, right? The more you listen to that, the more you hear it. Oh, yeah, this is the food I'd want today. This is actually the partner I'd want to connect with. I like this outfit. This feels like me, right? Like there's all these ways that starts to connect. And so I really do look at it as like a muscle that you start to flex.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much emphasis on really learning how to work with all of our pain and suffering and difficulty and trauma And that is also a muscle that can be developed. We can learn how to titrate, as we work with trauma and learn how to self-regulate as we go into these really dark, scary places and memories, and feelings that are so, so painful and hard to tolerate. And we can learn how to regulate the nervous system so that we can do that in a helpful way. And I think it's the exact same thing for pleasure, or for on the opposite end of the spectrum, which really doesn't isn't given as much attention in the healing process, but it is very much a muscle that needs to be, that it can be developed in the same way. And it's also very much related to the nervous system and our capacity to withstand that much joy in your body, and that much pleasure in your body, and that much love and compassion and care and kindness, and opening up to the mystical states of beauty and oneness and peace and aliveness and vitality and joy. Like, it is not, well, for one thing, it's not socially acceptable to be joyful and happy. And then it's also, yeah, we have all of this programming that it's not okay. And especially for me, and I think you kind of touched on this when you were talking, is, well, for me, I've had this feeling like it's not okay for me to be happy when
Mm,
so many other people are
mm,
suffering.
mm, mhm.
And it's been almost like like survivor's guilt. I heard somebody talk about that recently, and I'd never thought of it in those terms, but like, we're on this path for a lot of people who are on the path of healing and awakening, and the whole goal is to be free from suffering, and the whole goal is to be healed, be whole, be happy, be free, be vibrantly alive. And yet it's not okay. Like, I don't know. At least it's been not okay for me. And that's something that I have really, 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 really struggled with, is because I have been so deeply on this path of healing and awakening for my whole life and helping others. And I've had success. Like, I've had success on the path. And then I feel like it's not okay. It's like, because there's so
Yeah.
many people suffering. And so, yes, it's a muscle to develop. Like, how good can you stand it? Like, really. And I've found I have a lot of limitations in how good I can stand it. Like,
Mm.
how much joy and ecstasy and bliss and sacred pleasure I can hold in my nervous system without freaking out. Um, and I do psychedelic work with people too. And, going into really expanded states of consciousness, a lot of, people can have a strong contraction. They can
Mhm.
go into it, but there's a part, there can be parts of ourself that then reject it, that can't
Mhm.
hold that energy, and collapse back down into contraction or
Mhm.
fear response.
Mhm.
And so that's why it's both healing and awakening, because it's healing those wounds. Yeah.
Totally.
And the piece around so much, yeah, like you're saying, of the societal structures, that our beliefs and the whole ways in which we view things that limit us and prevent us from, actually being whole, actually being healed,
Right.
actually being fully awakened or alive or vibrant or joyful.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so complex, right? It's so hard
Yeah.
when, like, yeah, if you have clients and you hear these such difficult things, and right, you come out and you're supposed to live on with your day, or you're driving around, you see people who are unhoused or people who don't have resources, and you pick up any article and you see the rest of the world, it's almost impossible to say, like, how could I be happy when this is
Yeah.
also happening? Like, and I think a
Right.
lot of us are are feeling that, particularly in this age of having access to awareness that previous generations didn't have before the internet, to know like they just lived in their neighborhood. You had your usual scandal, not this like wide level awareness of the inequities. So then any level of stepping into the pleasure, it feels like, yeah, like that survivor's guilt. And I certainly don't have the answers to understand how we live in pleasure when other people are utterly suffering. But I do know that, that metaphor of you put the mask on for yourself before the child on the airplane, right? Like you cannot be in complete suffering all the time and expect to do large or even small level activism work, right? Like you will burn out. The amount of conversations I've had on this podcast about like activists and this sort of like, I need to change the system because yes. But if you continue to run in that, you will hit a wall where you literally cannot yourself. And so like, what does it mean to be in this dynamic dance between understanding that, yes, this is fucked up, and also what do I have in my life that is going well? How do I channel this energy to be in pleasure for myself so I can be in better connection to my community and my work, right? Like there's ripple effects to your joy. And one of the, I don't even know, it's like one of those quotes for like the best social justice work you can do is like smile. It's like one of those
Totally.
yogi tea quotes,
Totally.
like, and
Yeah.
it's true. Social justice work, like you see someone on the street and you smile, like that changes their day, your day, and the way that that can ripple out. And yeah, when you were talking about the psychedelic work, it reminds me a lot of just the experiences I've had with people who have had yeah, like you said, like that rebound effect where you might go somewhere and then it recoils, right? Or these experiences where they come into such deep states of pleasure. And then they kind of like look to me as the therapist. They're like, did I do it right? Is that okay? Like, we didn't talk about heavy stuff. And it's like, yes, like it is great that you're tapping into your pleasure and feeling that when you've been depressed for months. Like, we didn't have to talk about the depression. You actually went into that state of joy. How beautiful, right? But yeah, the complexities of sometimes when you access that state and then go back down because it's a part of yourself you haven't been in connection to, right? I think about the same thing with like pleasure and sex, right? People who have have that beautiful threesome, the scene, the multiple people, and then afterwards they're like, oh my God, who am I? And then they just go whoop, back down into the turtle shell, right? Like, this is weird, this is different, because pleasure, particularly in that area, is so forbidden, right? It's all connected.
Yeah, totally. One of the models that I've come up with that really helps me is
Mm-hmm.
I call the arc of healing.
Mm.
The longer name would be the mystical arc of healing and awakening, but that's a long
Sure.
title, so shortened is the arc of healing.
Yeah.
Um, the A stands for awareness and acknowledgement. The R and in the arc, so arc is an acronym for, yeah, the A stands for awareness and acknowledgement. The
Mm-hmm.
R stands for repair and reconnection. And the C stands for choice and creation.
Mm-hmm.
And so on this path of healing and awakening, the whole path, like the path of healing really requires both the ability to acknowledge what happened and move on. And people often get caught in one side or the other where they want to just ignore what has happened and just focus on moving on, moving forward, moving on, moving forward. And then there's, some people who just get caught in the suffering and can't move forward, no matter how many years of therapy and acknowledgement and talking about it there is, they're not able to actually move forward. And to really complete the whole healing process, it's this whole arc. And so, yeah, it begins with awareness. Sometimes we're lacking the awareness of what's going on. Why do we shrink back down after a pleasurable experience? Or we start to open up and be ourselves more fully. And then there's that rebound effect,
Mm-hmm.
or just the acknowledging the challenges and hardships of life in our world, and collectively, interpersonally, and individually, the hard things that we've endured, and the traumas that we've experienced. So having awareness first and being able to acknowledge the truth, simply acknowledging the truth, but without shame or blame. So we tend to, oftentimes what prevents us from moving forward is and acknowledging the truth both is this shame and blame. Like yeah, it's so too painful to look at. And so we tend to ignore it and want to pretend it's not there, or just get so caught up in the self beat up and the shame, or blaming other people, that we can't move forward. So being able to acknowledge the truth without shame or blame, so we can actually look at it and learn from it and repair. So the repair is really deeply about understanding through the heart of compassion, through love and forgiveness and understanding, and making amends. If we've harmed somebody or someone has harmed us, that we can make amends, that we can apologize, we can acknowledge the truth and apologize and make amends and make those repairs that are necessary for the healing process to continue to unfold. And that leads us to reconnection, which I think is the crux of it all, is really this being able to reconnect with the goodness within ourselves and the goodness within each other and with the goodness in the world. And so it's that repairing and reconnection on a relational level to ourselves, and reclaiming and reconnecting with the goodness in ourselves and all of our positive qualities. Like for me, this has been the most essential, life-changing thing that I've done after, decades of therapy and healing, and working on my trauma in such a painful, hard, challenging way. And I just had so much self-hatred and harsh inner critic, and lifelong suicidal depression. And I just had this complete and utter mental block around not being able to see any good in myself, like none at all. For whatever reason, that comes really naturally for me to see in other people. Like I can see the goodness in other people. That's like one of my absolute biggest strengths.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to being able to see that goodness in myself, there was just a complete and utter block around
Yeah.
that. And so that has been such an essential part of my healing process. And when I work with clients, it's really helping them focus on that positive aspect, that reconnection, like you were saying with your client, that they experienced pleasure. And like, yes, that is part of the healing, that
Mm-hmm.
reconnection, that reclaiming of it's like a soul retrieval of our positive qualities, our inner resources, but also, relationally, being able to restore and repair our ability to see the goodness in our partners, just to be able to see the goodness in our country,
Mm-hmm.
in our world, in our planet, in God, or the divine, or the great mystery, or whatever you want to call it. And then we can come into choice. Like choice, we can realize that we actually have the ability to respond, that it is a relational thing. How we respond to life, to how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to each other and the world and the divine, is a choice. And it's something that we have the power to change and affect. And so for me, it's about developing a different relationship to all of life,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that it is a choice and that there are other possibilities, because we get so caught. This is part of that, you know, programming part that you're talking about, of just
Mm-hmm.
how, like how culturally conditioned we are. We tend to think things have to be the way that they are,
Mm-hmm.
and that just we just take it for granted that it is the way that it is, but it's not. It's it is There's so many other possible ways in which it could be. There's so many other possible ways in which we could relate to life. There's so many other possible ways in which we can design relationships. And like you're doing, you're interested in all these different ways. And I've explored tons of different ways, my
Yeah.
sexuality and relationships, and created it for myself. And
Mm-hmm.
it is a choice when we open up to these other possibilities and ways of doing things and creating things. And this
Mm-hmm.
is when we get into the creation part of the arc of healing, is
Mm-hmm.
we can actually redesign the world. We can redesign our relationship to ourself, and our intimate relationships, our family relationships, our schools, our businesses, our government, our international politics, our relationship to the earth. Like we
Mm-hmm.
can redesign. It's all been designed. It's just designed unconsciously for the most part, based on just inherited generational, patterns that are playing out. When we go through this arc of healing and we come back into this place of empowerment and of choice, and we can recognize that there are other possibilities, we can start to experiment with new possibilities, new ways of doing things. And to me, this is what user experience is all about. It's usually used just for like making apps and websites better,
Yeah.
but it can be applied to all of life,
Sure.
that we can design life to be a better user experience
Right.
for all of us. Like,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so the main problem to solve, like in user experience design, it's part of it is figuring out the right problem to solve.
Mm.
And I think in redesigning the world, the right problem to solve is win-win. How do we make the world, redesign the world so that it works for everyone? Like literally, absolutely everyone. And we start designing and coming up with ideas and possibilities and experimenting with how to do that, how to redesign work to work for everyone, how to redesign relationships to work for everyone, how to redesign parenting to work for everyone, how to redesign the government to work for everyone, on and on. And that's back to sacred pleasure. To me, that is the most sacred pleasure, is that not only do we have a life that is deeply fulfilling to us, that brings us aliveness and vitality, but we also are designing a world in which everyone is supported in being able to be fully alive and vibrantly alive and healthy, and have their needs met, have their needs for basic necessities met, for food and shelter and clothing, as well as there are emotional needs for safety and love and care and compassion and belonging. And that is the most sacred pleasure to me,
Mm-hmm.
is win-win,
Yeah.
is, yeah, seeing other people be happy and having it be okay for me to be happy.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's the role of the anarchist, right? To like see that future, to dream of that possibility and to think about where we could go, right? We're here now, yes, but where could we be, right? And to dream about that world of deeper pleasure. Part of me just thinks that many of us in our like current state of pleasure would be giving up some of that, right? Like all of us Amazon primers get that delivered in the next couple hours while not thinking about the ways that that impacts or where it was made. In fact, right? Like I do wonder what it would look like for all of us to actually be in a state of having like equality in terms of access to pleasure. I think that at least for sure the people at the top, like for sure the people doing power over dynamics that have the majority of the wealth. I think it was like, I feel like I looked it up recently. It was like 49% of the global wealth is owned by the 1%. It was pretty intense. So I imagine they're going to have to give up some of that, right? If we really want to redistribute like this whole thing, they're going to have to give up pleasure, which they're not going to want to do because right now, you know how nice it is to have millions of dollars and be like, I get my massage and my food delivered here, 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 right? So I'm curious like what it does actually look like for all of us to like get up off of our asses and actually get into the fight and like change the system in a way like where I feel like most of us are pretty complicit. Like a lot of us, especially in Western America, are very complicit with our lives in ways while other people are suffering. So it's a really deep question, I think, of like how do we actually get that world of everybody having access to this? It's probably a question I'll like examine for the rest of my life, right? As someone in the space, as other healers and activists in the space of like, how do we actually get towards that? What sort of discomforts do I actually need to embrace to get closer towards that?
Yeah, I think it is a good question and the right question to be asking. And the right problem to solve
Yeah.
is how do we design a world that works for everyone, that really truly can benefit
Yeah.
everyone? And coming back to the great mystery, like we don't actually have to know the answers. I think that's
Right.
one of the obstacles is like, yeah, that's a nice dream. That's a great fantasy, but
Right.
how does that actually happen?
Right.
And because we can't imagine how that's possible, we just disregard it as just pure fantasy. But it's really, we don't actually have to know all of the details. The most important thing is first the intention and the desire to design the world to work for everyone and having everything that we do around that focus. And then it's really just experimenting. Let's experiment. And people have knowledge in all these different areas. And it's going to take all of us with all of our unique knowledge and all of our unique skills for everyone who's followed their passion into studying this obscure thing and that
Right.
obscure thing and this obscure thing to really work together to with the same goal. So it's this reorientation to me or that, well, it's this massive paradigm shift. So I also do paradigm shifting coaching is what I call it, because it's really does require a paradigm shift to be able to do this. One of the biggest paradigm shifts is the box that we're all in that we don't even question. Like when we're inside of a paradigm, a worldview, a reality, we just take it for granted that it
Right.
is the way that it is. We're just assume we just, it is the way it is. We don't even question
Mm-hmm.
it. And one of the biggest things that paradigms that our whole world is designed around right now is actually win, lose, and lose, win, which is ultimately a lose-lose situation. So, like you were saying, like the top 2%, yes, maybe, it'll be easy for them to be happy and to get their needs met. And that's often the assumption, right? That the people who are on top are the ones who are winning and everyone else is losing. And so the solutions that we come up with are kind of like what you were saying, that the only way would be now for the people who are winning to start losing and the people who are losing to start winning. Like there would, it's still within this paradigm that of win lose and lose win. And so the paradigm shift is out of that whole mentality of scarcity, that whole mentality of there's not enough for everyone, that it's not possible for everyone to actually have their needs met and be happy. That's all we've ever known is that there's people on top and then there's a revolt, the people who are being oppressed gather together and they topple over the people who were in power. And then the cycle just repeats itself again and again and again throughout all of history, where the victims become the perpetrators and the perpetrators become the victims, and then the victims become the perpetrators. And then the heroes try to come in and solve things too, but they're just making things work. Every person on every side of every war thinks that they're the hero. They
Mm-hmm.
think that they are the good guys. They're fighting for their safety of their loved ones, the safety of themselves, the safety of their country, the safety of their people, for their own, they're fighting for their own well-being. They're fighting for their freedom. They're fighting for the things that they believe in. Every single person on every side of every single war and conflict believes that they are the heroes. And this whole pattern keeps perpetuating where it's just a continuous revolving. People who are on the power downside go into the power upside, and people are on the upside go into the power downside. But there's a totally different solution. So, and the different solution requires a radical shift in consciousness. And it is win-win. And it is something that, yeah, is going to be is a massive shift for how we normally think, because we don't think about things in those terms.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I think what I think about with that is like the ways that the patriarchy hurts men, right? Like, yes, like the
Yeah.
people who are men are suffering under that system too. But like the reality is, the men had to give up power over literally everything, right? So they did lose. Like, I don't know if we can really get out of that. Like, when you really think about the 1% and their ability to like run life right now to such a degree that so many of us could never even fathom, like, there is going to have to be a loss of their power for the overall betterment of society, right? I think, right? When we dismantle patriarchy, we're starting to see men cry. And I think that's good. So I think like that loss of power that they have through the control is an overall good, but it is going to be some sort of loss, right? Like the 1% is going to need to lose, and we are going to have to revolt to make that change. And I think they're going to go kicking and screaming and crying the whole fucking way, which is what they're doing, right? As many of us are getting angry and upset about the vast inequities of this world. But I think, is it going to be for the better? Yes. Is it going to be into abundance? Yes, I think so. Because I think when you had mentioned that quote, really the word zest came from my studies of feminist psychology, which comes back to relationships. And so they would say that like good relationships give us the five good things, which I get a little like, five, like any sort of restriction, like there's probably more. But one of them being zest, like this zest for life, and how good relationships quite literally bring that life force for us. And so yeah, I feel like the people who are in bad relationships, whether it's to larger society, earth, right, spirituality, the divine, you're not thriving when you're not in good relationships. And I think power over
Hmm.
dynamics like that, I think those people are suffering too in their power up
Yes.
there, right? Like the patriarchy. So I hear what you're saying. And I do think there's going to have to be a radical like revolt though, and they're going to cry when you take that away, right? Like, but you're right, it's a paradigm shifting of seeing like what's on the other side. I just don't think that that fight is going to go easy. Literally look at the 5 day work week. Like literally people died so that the people who own businesses stopped requiring us to work 7 days a week, and then they had to change the labor that you were paid to compensate for that. Like if we go anything like that, there's literally going to be bloodshed. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how else to see it any other way, just because of how much power they really do have when we really think about the 1%. I don't know. I dream
Hmm.
of a world where it's not like that, but I just don't know what the realities are of that lived
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hate being the pessimist. Fuck, uh,
No, no,
uh.
I think you're giving voice to all of our concerns. I mean, I definitely go there too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's hard to maintain a sense of optimism and hope when it seems like these patterns are so deeply entrenched and so impossible to change. But I really, truly think that it's because when we are trying to solve the problem within the paradigm that is creating the problem, no matter what solution we come up with, it's just going to recapitulate the problem. And so it is a radical shift into a new paradigm, into seeing something different, radically different that is possible, not doing it the same way, but doing it in a different way, which is that every single person on the planet is inherently valuable and has inherent worth just for being who they are, whether they are a billionaire or, a criminal or a poor person or, you know, a an ideal citizen, I don't know, whatever. Every
Yeah.
person from the top to the bottom, throughout all of society, from the lowest to the low, to the highest to the high, and everything and everyone in between has inherent worth and has inherent value. And that we have a shared humanity. We have a shared humanity and a shared needs around our basic needs and for love, for emotional, spiritual, physical needs. And so it's really a radical shift into valuing every life. And so
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense from the new paradigm that we would want to harm anyone, that we would need bloodshed, it would require people to be in pain. It would be the exact opposite. How can we do this? Not just the outcome of, we think that through war and through violence and through revolt in these violent ways, that somehow, someday that's going to bring us to peace, that somehow, someday that's going to bring us to more equality. And yet the goal is the path. Like there's a quote, there's no way to peace. Peace is the way.
Yeah.
The new paradigm, the new way of doing things is that the path is the goal. And so if we want peace, we practice peace. If we want love, we practice love. If we want compassion, we practice compassion. If we want generosity, we practice generosity and kindness. All of these things, the goal is the path. And so the new way of doing things isn't a violent way. It isn't a way that is about tearing other people down so that now you can be on top. It's about finding our commonality and our common shared humanity and shared deep needs, not superficial needs for Amazon package being delivered tomorrow.
Right.
I'm talking about our deep needs that we
Yeah.
all share.
Yeah.
And we can meet those deep needs. And when those deeper needs are being met, a lot of the superficial stuff falls away. It's not as important. That's not where the happiness is
Right.
to be found.
Totally. I agree. I feel like the more you have like thriving relationships, connection to the land, the less you're wanting of capitalism and the goods, the pretty bag of symbol and status or whatever, the car, I guess I just like, yeah, because I don't want violence either. I guess I just try to like think about the realities of like, ooh, I'm not a pacifist if someone's attacking me, right? Like I'm going to fight back. I don't want to lead with that, but if I'm starting to be assaulted on the street, I'm going to scream and fight back and hit that person. And I think that's where the interesting conversations of climate change start, right? Like, oh, like our world is being actively harmed, actively like attacked. So what does it
Yeah.
mean to have to respond to that, right? I do think that's really an interesting space too, where people think about like violence. Violence is occurring to the earth, and so what does it mean to respond back, especially when you're not being listened to in ways of the government being broken and that not being effective enough. I don't have the answers to these problems. I just like I'm just
Yeah.
sitting here feeling it and just thinking about like, yeah, what does I don't want it to be violent, but if they're not listening, what do
Right.
you do, right? So, I mean, hey man, that's why I start a podcast and I have conversations. That's my path, right? Is here is my
Right.
pessimism piece, right? Like, let's talk, let's get excited, let's think about it together and move that so that we don't have to have the bloodshed. And because that's not what I want. But yeah, what happens when you're repeatedly being attacked? I think it will be very interesting to see how this like monopoly game, particularly of capitalism, as we continue to get towards like the last rounds, where if you've played, you start to see, oh, like someone has all the money. Oh, this is not fun no more, like so. And I think part of this conversation too is very like large scale. And I've in my work, I noticed that like sometimes when I do this large scale conversation, like we mentioned earlier, I start to go into the fight, right? Fight, flight, fawn, freeze. I'm in trauma brain now. I don't know what to do. These systems are so large. I don't know what to do. So I'm thinking maybe it'd be helpful to come back to like the grounding of our like local and community base. Like, what does it mean to come back into sacred pleasure and work on a local version so that we can kind of like stay within at least what's within our control right now?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, two things come to mind. One is that I think you're absolutely right. It is very important to have it grounded into
Right.
what can we do now? What
Yeah.
is like a step that we can take in the right direction? And I think it is very important to have the big conversations to open up new possible ways of seeing things in a really from a really vast view, from a really different reality, from a very different perspective. And so, feet on the ground, action wise, it comes back to design and having an experimental mindset and being willing to not know. Okay, don't know. Here we are right now with the world we're living in and the amount of extreme pain and suffering and poverty and despair and violence in our world. And being able to see a vision of what is possible, because if we can't even see it, if we can't even imagine
Right.
it, if we can't even hold that in our nervous system and in our being,
Mm-hmm.
it's very unlikely that we're going to move in that
Right.
direction. And so, yes, this is the arc of healing. Let's acknowledge where we're at right now. This is the path. Let's acknowledge where we're at right now. What is the truth in our own life? What is causing us suffering right now in our own life? And how are we creating suffering for other people in our life? And how are they creating suffering for us? How can we have those honest conversations, but without the shame and the blame? Because that is not, we think we need shame and blame to learn. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the sweetheart message underneath that is if somebody's hurt, it gets punished enough, then they'll learn their lesson and they'll stop doing that bad behavior. If I punish myself enough, then I'll learn my lesson and I'll stop doing my bad behavior. But that shame and that blame and that punishment keeps the cycle perpetuating itself. And so instead, we can learn without that. And actually, we can learn much more because it's safe to actually look and be honest. That's the acknowledgement piece, like you're saying. They're not listening, they're not hearing us, right? And so, how can we make it safer? How can we make it safer to have the honest conversations about what is causing suffering in our own life and in our world and begin to do the repair that's necessary? How do we make amends? How do we heal? How do we acknowledge the harm that's been done and that we've done and repair that? And it can be as large scale as you want because it's the same process, whether it's you're working on your relationship to yourself, you're working on your relationship with your partner or your
Mm-hmm.
child or your parent or your boss. How can we repair that? How can we find forgiveness through love and compassion and understanding and reconnect with the goodness in each other to actually see that, to
Mm-hmm.
look for the positive intent
Yeah.
behind our dysfunctional behavior of acting out in the stress response of fight, flight, freeze, fawn,
Right.
how can we see that as something that has kept us safe
Right.
and something to appreciate, not, and to recognize the harm that it causes, not to ignore that or deny that, but to also see the sweetheart message behind it. What is the positive intent there? And then get creative. How can we get that need met for safety? How can we get that need met for love and connection in a new way, in a different way? And then this is where the experimental mindset, the growth mindset, they're calling it the progress paradigm is what we call it. My husband and I, he's writing a book about it and contrasting it with the punishment paradigm.
Sure.
And the punishment paradigm is kind of the way in which we go about doing a lot of things. We motivate ourselves through fear and pain and
Yeah.
punishment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's in all of our systems in
Yep.
society. We've internalized it, and it's in our relationships, and it's, on a larger scale in our society and our world. And there's a new way. There's the progress paradigm. And there are principles, guiding principles that my husband outlines in his book that give us direction of, okay, this has got like 8 anti-principles of the punishment paradigm, and it's a way of doing things in a stressful way. We do things in this way and it leads to stress. This is part of the acknowledgement. Okay, when we go about life in this way or relating in this way, this creates pain and suffering. And when we go about it in this other way, it creates joy and aliveness and vitality and a deep win-win, a sacred pleasure that's not just a superficial pleasure, but a deep soul enlivening pleasure of having the freedom to be our full, authentic self and having the freedom to express ourselves and to follow our joys and follow our passions and follow our heart, reconnecting to the part in all of us that wants to be happy and wants other people to be happy at the deepest level, when we can really wade through all of the garbage and well, not garbage, but all of the protective mechanisms and really get to a core place in our heart that does have a deep love for all of humanity. And start to create from that place, start to make decisions in our life and in our relationships from that place, and how we talk to ourselves and how we talk to our partners, our kids, our
Right.
bosses, our employees, everyone in our life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. A couple of things I was thinking about are like, and starting that, we go to the body, right? When you're in the fight, flight, fawn, freeze, where's your breath at? How shallow is it, right? Or are you breathing into that belly? And if you start there, we can at least work from bottom up processing to slow down and be present. And when you are sitting with that person across from you, like you said, assuming good intent, right? And sometimes that can be hard. And then remembering hurt people hurt people. And then going even
Yes.
further, like, okay, I'm really struggling right now. I'm trying to now see this adult human as maybe their younger self, that hurting inner child. And sometimes that makes it a little
Yes.
bit easier for me to connect with, of like, okay, I can
Yes,
see where this is
exactly.
coming from. And then from there, we're moving in a different space. Now we're interacting differently. And of course,
Yes.
there's space for self-protection. If your boundaries aren't met and met and met, you do have to enact that. But what does it mean for us to slow down enough so that we can start from an embodied space of assuming good intent? My brain's thinking nonviolent communication, great book, plug that, right? Like, how do we actually start from that space of embodiment so that we can assume the best intent? And what a different world it would be. So many of us hear something and immediately, oh, they're trying to attack me, they're this, they're that, let me yell back, right? Like, what a different world it would be to just slow down enough and have some curiosity first. Again, if they
Yes,
are attacking
exactly.
you, we can use boundaries and step back. However, many of us leap, right? Particularly if you've had past experiences where relationships have patterned that, where you need to leap faster because maybe that person did do that in the past. So, like, new opportunity, jump, right? Versus Okay, I'm going to take this deep breath. What did you mean by that? Before I make assumptions, I'm curious, what did you mean by that? Oof, different world, different world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then trusting the ripples of that, right? Like trusting the ripples
Hmm.
of like, again, the large scale stuff, so hard, not for us to give up, but sometimes it can feel literally outside of our control. And so the ability to trust that like your community needs you, right? Like our communities need us to have this level of embodiment so that we can love and show up. And the ways that that sort of relational holding can ripple out, maybe you are that first friend that is modeling that to someone. You know, typically
Yes,
what ends up
exactly.
happening is it's in the therapy room, right? Or a healer, a
Right.
spiritual healer who can kind of hold that. But the more that we can actively do that, oh, I see that future world. I do. I do see
Yes.
that future
Yes.
world.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I think that's the thing, right? Like, we don't know what the future holds, but our minds do have the capacity to kind of weave possibilities for the future based on pattern recognition.
Right.
And so when we think about the future and we project our view of the future based on the information that we are sorting for in our own mind. So if we're sorting for, looking for all the negative intent and all of the bad things, and that's all all that we're seeing, that's all we can see. And we think about that and we look and we get all of the examples because there's so many examples. Everybody knows, like all you
Right.
can, everybody can go there,
Right.
and you project that, you weave that into the future, you project that into the future. Oh, if we keep going in this direction, we keep doing the same things that we've been doing, it's going to lead to mass destruction and, just more horror and misery and pain
Yeah.
and violence. But the opposite is true too. What you just glimpsed that. You just got into the experiential sense of what it's like to do things in a different way, in a radically different way. And as you start thinking about we can do things in a radically different way, and you start weaving that into the future, and it's like, oh, right. If we all like do these various things, that weaves a very different future. That creates a
Mhm.
very different future for humanity that is moving in the direction of win-win, a deep win-win of everyone's needs being taken care of. Like you said, hurt people hurt others. And so if we really, really, really understand that, it
Mhm.
doesn't make sense to
I know.
hurt
Right.
people who are hurt. It doesn't make any sense at all to
R-
hurt people who are hurt.
Right.
It's, it's,
If
yeah,
that hurt person is trying to hurt me though, that's where it gets tricky, right? If
it
I
does. Right.
am being
Right.
assaulted on the street, I'm gonna bite back. And that's where like
Right.
I'm trying to walk this ground of like
Yeah.
literally what does it mean to live in this world of like hurt people, and when do we come back with actual violence for self-defense? Like, oh, what a complex. I feel like we're like really like riding that line though of like
Yeah.
the new paradigm of what does it mean to put predominantly love forward as the step
Yeah.
when we know the system is so broken, when we know hurt people and use violence as the last resort of, because
Right.
you have to, right? And so that, but like, oh yeah, so many years of that being the forward foot. What does it mean to make that
Yeah.
the back foot of
Right.
last pieces? I just get worried about the like super like Pollyanna, like we can just love everybody into the world, and like I don't know. I
I
do
think it's
believe
I
in
think
that.
it's
I
I
do
think it's
believe.
a embodied.
Yeah.
I think it comes back to what you're pointing to though, and how you were able to start seeing what the possible world could look like when
Mm-hmm.
you were thinking about it in this way, because
Yeah.
it really is about embodying these new principles. So just a brief overview of the 8 principles that my husband's writing about in his book, which is called The Joy of Doing: How to Make Work Work for Everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very specifically applying these 8 principles broadly as a philosophical, thing that can be applied to all aspects of life on this large scale, but also specifically, how do we make work so we're not having the Sunday scaries, that
Right.
work is actually something that can be in soul enlivening instead of soul sucking.
Right.
It's how we do everything. It's how we relate to everything. So the first principle is, instead of forcing ourselves and others to do things, we are increasing our sense of choice. And so it's a non-forcing approach. And this is a radical shift, but it's something we can start to embody, something we can start to practice within ourselves on a very small moment to moment scale, of getting out of this paradigm of forcing, always forcing ourselves and not listening, not actually honoring and respecting somebody's no, not honoring and respecting somebody's autonomy, not honoring, respecting our own no, when our body, when our mind or our soul or spirit is saying, no, don't do that, don't go in that direction. And we override that, or we try to force that, instead practicing listening to ourself and respecting our own no. In fact, enthusiastically welcoming our no and enthusiastically welcoming other people's no, because that's the feedback we need to develop our internal GPS, which is our guidance system based on the no's and based on our full enthusiastic yeses. And so that's really one of the most fundamental things too, is the switch out of like a have to forcing mode into, actually, we don't have to. We actually have choice. We actually can say no. We can actually do something different. And then the second principle is, the anti-principle is deleting the possibilities. So not even seeing that anything else is possible, just the only way we can do it is through violence, or the only way we can do it is somebody wins and somebody else loses. And instead, the principle of seeing the possibilities, opening up to more possibilities, being willing to step outside of the box of how things have always been done, even if they've been done, that's all we've ever known. We can still step out of the box and see something else that's possible. We can see and envision a better world and a better way
Mhm.
of doing things that is deeply honoring and respectful of everyone's consent and
Mhm.
autonomy, and see that we could create a world that would be in alignment with that and deeply respectful and beneficial for everyone. And then the third thing is, the anti-principle is taking in the bad. So it's that always scanning for the bad in life and assuming negative intent. And that creates a whole different way of relating, like you were describing so perfectly. And the opposite being taking in the good and being able to see the positive intent, but also being able to take in the good of life. Like how we started this
Mhm. Yeah.
conversation with taking in the beauty that's all around us. And we always, instead of just only taking in the bad, learning how to build that muscle and take in the good and see the beauty in ourselves and each other, in the world and in the divine. And the fourth one is, the anti-principle is to deny failure and ignore feedback and punish mistakes. And so that's what we tend to do. We tend to not want to acknowledge when we've caused harm or other people have caused harm. We want to be like, put our fingers in our ears and nah, 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 not listen, not want to look,
Mhm.
don't look that way. Don't
Yeah.
talk about that. But instead, the principle would be to transform failure into feedback through this process of acknowledging the truth and forgiving and learning and iterating and improving and just making it safe to fail, because we all fail and we're going to fail a bazillion times
Mhm.
as we try to create a better world. And we've
Yep.
already failed a bazillion times. It's like, okay, let's just acknowledge how far we've come, take in the good at least a little bit too. Like we have actually made progress. I think people forget that, but
Hmm.
we have made progress. And it's not highlighted in the news, but we
Right.
have made tremendous progress. And we can continue to make progress. We can continue to iterate and improve. And if it's safe to fail, if we're not severely punished for our failures, but it's okay to experiment and to try things. Oh, okay, that didn't work. Let's be honest about what the results were and learn from that. Forgive ourselves, because that doesn't helpful to beat ourselves up or beat each other up and punish ourselves. It just gets in the way of our learning. So if the whole goal is to learn and to get better and to improve so we can create a better world, like that is essential. And then the next anti-principle is making it hard work. We have such an orientation in our world towards things having to be hard. Life has to be hard. Life has to be so painful. We're also kind of touching on this in the beginning of our conversation, and the new principle would be to make the difficult easy. It doesn't mean that we just skate by in life and we don't do anything that's hard, because we all love a challenge, actually. It's kind of exciting, right? To do something that's challenging and really requires you to have all of your courage and all of your resources and all of your strength and to grow. Like it's exciting and interesting to challenge ourselves. But when we make it so hard and so painful, we're not very successful, right? We create all these obstacles. And so part of user experience design is recognizing that we can be so much more successful when we design for ease and enjoyment, so we can actually accomplish what we want to accomplish. Like, what if we could accomplish creating a better world that is more peaceful and more equitable and more based on win-win for everyone, but we didn't do it in a hard way? That's the old paradigm. Doing it in a hard way, in a painful way, in a violent way. That's the old paradigm. Punishment paradigm. The new way is finding a way, even if we don't know how yet, experimenting, finding a way to do it in a way that is peaceful, that is loving, that is kind, that is healing to all of our deep wounds. It's getting to the root of the problem and making the difficult easy. So we can make this process of making our life better, making the world better, easier and more enjoyable. And then the sixth anti-principle is doing everything all at once. This is where we often get caught too. And especially with world problems, big, big stuff is like, it's never going to get so overwhelmed because we're trying to take it all on at once. Like we have to figure it all out right now. But if we expand our sense of time and start thinking about things in deep time, in generations, and we think about how far we've come in generations, and we think about how far we can go so that future generations are born into a totally radically different world. Like that motivates me. Maybe we make a little progress right now, but that's great. At least we're not keep going in the direction that's causing more pain and suffering. We've at least stopped. That's progress. Turn around. That's progress. Start taking a tiny little step in the right direction. That's progress. And so we do one little thing at a time. We take one little step at a time that's moving towards more peace. It's moving towards more love and kindness and compassion for everyone. This expanded sense and circle of care to extend to the entire world and to the entire cosmos and to every single part of ourself. And we don't have to do it all at once. And then the seventh principle is the anti-principle is doing it alone. We think we have to do it alone. Like it's all up to us and the weight of the world is on our shoulders and we'll never be able to do it. It seems impossible, right? If we think about having to do it alone, but we don't. The new way and the progress paradigm is that we do it together. We seek support. We can absolutely do it together. We can make so much more progress together. And we're not alone. When we get into contact with the deepest desires of our heart, we all want to be happy and safe and free to be ourself and to be loved and to be able to pursue our gifts and share our gifts with the world and have that wanted and appreciated and of benefit to the whole world. We want that, like, and we can support each other in doing that. And then the last principle, the anti-principle, is dominate or be dominated. This is the win-lose or lose-win paradigm of only thinking it can be one way or the other. And the new paradigm of optimizing for win-win. Even if we don't know how to do it, we don't know how to do it. We don't know, have a lot of practice doing things that way. But we can experiment with all these other principles in place through honoring people's consent, through really having a choice, through seeing able to see the possibilities, through being able to take in the good and the pleasure and the beauty of life, and to be able to have it be safe to fail and make mistakes and to just try things and to keep iterating and improving and learning and growing. And it's an ongoing process. It's not going to, there's no end to it. There's no end to how good it can fucking be. Oh, sorry.
You can curse in this space. Go for it.
It can be so ridiculously good. And so we can learn how to stand that much goodness and move in the direction and move through heal whatever needs to be healed so that we can hold that much goodness in our life and create that much goodness in the world. And we can make the difficult easy. We can start to optimize and make the things that are really hard easier through that experimentation. And we don't have to do it all at once, and we don't have to do it alone. We can do it together, and we can do it in a way that benefits all. That's my vision for the world. That's what my practice, my work is all about, is awakening together.
Beautiful. I really appreciate you sharing that with me and all of the listeners. I feel like there's so much there to really like think and reflect on and integrate into their lives of how we create this new future, this world together. I really appreciate you including those. And I'd love for people to get curious about like, what does it mean to start incorporating those into their lives? I think it's a very important piece to include for the listeners to like take that next step in terms of the ripples.
Yeah. And just embodying it. I think that's the way that we can do it. That's what everyone has the power to do, is to embody these principles. And that absolutely has a ripple effect. It helps heal the past, it helps heal the present, and it helps heal the future.
So beautiful. Well, I want to take a deep breath with you. So I'm going to take that. And I know we're coming towards the end of our time, so I want to check in with you and see if there was anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners. Otherwise, I have a closing question that I can guide us towards.
You can go with the closing question.
Okay, Jessica. So the closing question that I ask every guest on the show is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
Yeah. My answer to this question is, I wish everyone knew that it was normal to not be normal.
Anarchist check.
Yes, but I think that this is actually how we heal and awaken together, is through the celebration of our diversity, and it's going beyond the goal of normal to the goal of authentic expression and celebration of diversity. Because in my view, there is no normal. There is no normal, that everyone is different. Like, that is the most exquisite thing, in my opinion, about life. Like, the magic and mystery of life is that not even two snowflakes are the same, let alone two humans. Like, there'll never be another person just like you that has all of your lived experience and rich history and thoughts and feelings and hopes and dreams and fears and strengths and weaknesses, and our everybody's unique gender and shape and size and color and just the richness and vastness of diversity, I think is the most beautiful thing in the entire world. And so my wish would be that we go beyond the goal of normal and we come into this place of celebration of diversity, and that our difference isn't a threat. Our difference isn't something to hide or to be ashamed of or to punish in others or to repress, but it's something to like support and empower and cultivate, because it's our own diversity and listening to our own hearts and our own path and our own peculiar callings that is exactly what the world needs. It's exactly what the world needs in order to heal. Like, you are the medicine that the world needs in order to heal. And so, yeah, I would hope that it would be normal in the sense of just commonplace, that we are all supporting each other and being our full, authentic, unique, diverse expression, and loving and honoring and appreciating everybody else's unique, diverse expression. That would be my wish.
Hell yeah. I love a good anarchist who deconstructs the question, says, no, no normal. And I say, good job. So you're in line with all of the anarchists.
Yes.
So absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really appreciate you like sharing your vision, sharing your sacred pleasure, and all the different ways that the listeners, myself, we can continue to meditate on what it means to step into this next version of both ourselves on the individual and the collective.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. It was such a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, such a joy. And I want to hold space for you to plug too, for the listener who's connected with you, wants to work with you. Where can they find your stuff?
Oh, okay. Yeah, just my website, my name, jessicamcduffie.com. And I do paradigm shifting coaching. So help people with this paradigm shift in their own life, so that we can create a world that works for everyone. And I've created a process called Awakening Together through Collaborative Dreaming, so we can dream a better world into existence and heal and awaken together. So yeah, that's the work that I do.
Great. So I'll have all of that linked below for the listeners so they can just click in the show notes. So thank you, Jessica. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to get resources and learn more about all the things we talked about on today's episode. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.